What's up, everybody? I'm Matt Gary, and in this episode of Coding with the Fours, we're going to go over what conditional statements are in Apex. We'll figure out what they are, why they're important, when to use them, and most importantly, we'll do an example in Apex together. Alright everybody, welcome back to this Apex Masterclass tutorial series. Today we are going to take a look at conditional statements, otherwise known as, or commonly referred to as, if-else statements in Apex. And we're going to figure out what they are, when to use them, why to use them, and of course, just like always, we're going to do an example together in Apex. But before we get into conditional statements, make sure if you actually enjoy this video to like it, because when you do, it helps this video get out to more people just like you that want to learn this stuff for free. So if you enjoy the video, like it. Now let's get back to conditional statements. So first things first, what is a conditional statement? It's basically a way in your code to say, code, I only want you to operate if the following things or conditions are true, right? It's going to prevent anything from happening within the block of code, as you'll see here in a minute, unless the variables that we're working with in the code meet certain conditions, right? So it's basically a way of preventing your code from acting on data or variables or whatever that you don't want it to, and have it only act on data that you do want it to act on. As far as why that's useful, I think when we do the example together, that'll be pretty obvious, but you know, there are tons of situations where if data is filled out one way, say you've got a contact record and maybe you've got multiple record types on that contact record, and you only want certain pieces of your code to execute if it's record type, if that contact is of record type A, or you want some different code to execute if it's record type B. Well, you might use a conditional statement to deal with that, right? And you're going to see when you're writing your code that you're going to use conditional statements all the time to get things done. And what I will say is be cautious with the amount of conditional statements you do. This isn't something we'll get into until much later in the series, but you can have too many conditionals, and it can make it so that your code is too complex. That said, don't worry about that for now. Just know that that's a thing. Be aware of your conditionals. Don't overuse them. And we will go over that in much more detail when we get to the clean code section of this Apex tutorial series, or Apex Masterclass tutorial series. All right, guys. So let's do an example in Apex together and just figure out how conditional statements work. So I am going to create a new Apex class, and we'll just call this conditional state. I'm just going to do statement example, like so. And I'm going to zoom in, maybe. Okay, there we go. And I'm going to make a method, and we'll just make it public static conditional, void. I don't want it to return anything. Conditional statement example. Actually, maybe I will have it return a string, just so that we can easily see how this works, I suppose. Maybe, or my keyboard, keyboard, whoa, is going to give out on me. I'm not sure, one or the other. Okay, so we'll have it return a string, and let's create, a conditional statement together. first we need some kind of variable to work with. Okay, so I am going to pass into this method a contact, and we'll call it, you know, who knows, just cont to make it nice and simple and short. And we're going to write our first conditional statement by saying if, and we'll say if cont dot first name equals Harry, then return tacos. And then you can say else if cont dot first name equals Matt, return chocolate. And then you can create another statement here that says else return what? Like so, right? And essentially what you can do with these if-else statements here, if else, is you can see this is the if statement here in your conditional is your entry point, right? It's your very first one. And it's going to be, so it's obviously going to be evaluated first. If our first name of the contact record that we pass in is not equal to Harry, then it's going to say, all right, now I've got to evaluate this. And if the first name is not equal to Matt, then it's going to say, all right, well, we tried both of our conditional statements. None of them came true. So we're going to return what? Now, it's important to know here, you don't need either of these statements for this to work. You can just have an if. It's going to complain I don't have a string return here, but you can just have this one if statement. You don't need an else if, you don't need an else. But if you have multiple conditions to check for, you can technically have as many else ifs to check for your conditions as you'd like to. And you can always have this else to kind of catch everything else that doesn't meet your condition up here. So that's kind of what they're for. Now, when I said earlier you want to kind of be wary of your conditionals, lots of people will just go crazy with these if, else ifs, else ifs, else ifs, else ifs, else ifs. They'll even go as far as to nest if statements within if statements, which is rarely necessary, I'll say. So in cases where you have tons and tons and tons of else ifs, or else if statements, you probably want to break it out into methods, which again we'll go over more in clean code. But this is kind of what I'm talking about, is you can maybe see here if you're not cautious with what you're doing and thinking about how do I write something that's easy to handle. Your if else ifs can get really, really, really out of hand. But anyway, that's how this works. And let's just demo this together to see, how this would work out. So I'm going to open up my Anonymous Apex window. And down here in the Apex Anonymous window, we are going to create a contact. And I realize, as I'm writing this, that we have yet to go over how to create records or data in Apex for your objects. But try not to worry about that too much. We're going to go over that in much more detail just a few episodes from now. So we will get there. But you're going to see, I guess, right now, at least to some extent, how to create them. So we're going to create a contact. And, we'll call it new contact. And we'll give it a first name equal to Harry. And I believe contacts have to have last names, so we're going to give it a last name. And we'll make it equal to Jambalaya. Why not? And then we're going to do a conditional statement example. Conditional statement example. I guess I named the method and the class name the same. I'm not paying attention. I should probably change this. But you know what? It's fine. And we're going to pass in contact. And as you can see from the method, it's going to return a string. So we'll say string, or actually, we'll just system.debug its return statement, like so. We'll say this is what the conditional returned. Whoop. Like so. And then we will run this. And as you can see, maybe down here, in the debug log that popped up, this is what the conditional returned tacos. And so you can see that this conditional statement, right, entered into this block here, this if block, and it returned the word tacos because our contact's first name was Harry. And it didn't go into any of these other blocks because it didn't need to. It was true on the first one, so what's going to happen is it's not even going to evaluate either of these, right? Because it doesn't need to. Now, if we changed our first name to Matt and we ran this again, we will hopefully see chocolate. And it says this is what the conditional returned, chocolate. And so, again, this time it evaluated this if statement. It turned out to be false. Then it went to this one, and it turned out to be true, and it just returned chocolate and did not go into this block, right? Because it didn't need to. There was no need to evaluate anything else. This was true. We returned. And last but not least, let's just say jump for the first name, because why not? And we should hopefully, because the first name is now no longer Harry or Matt, we are going to hopefully get a return of what. And it says this is what the conditional returned, what, right? So, cool. There is plenty more to say about conditionals, especially when it comes to the concept or the idea of writing clean code, which again, we're going to get to more in depth later in this series, much later, I will say. But this is what a conditional statement is. This is how conditional statement works. And it's important to know, one last thing, that you can chain things in your conditionals. So if you wanted to say only return tacos if the first name is Harry and the last name is also jambalaya, right, like we have, then you can do that. And you can chain as many of these as you want. And you can do, you know, even more than this, where you can say, if the first name is Harry and the last name is jambalaya, or the first name, the contact's first name equals Jim Bob, like that, then this would work too. And basically how this would work is if we had a contact whose name was Harry and its last name was jambalaya, or if this one wasn't true up here, but we had the first name Jim Bob, then we would still return tacos. So you can put a lot of criteria in each if statement. And again, this is another area where clean code comes into play. Again, we'll talk about it more. But it's important to know that you can do this, but you don't want to run away with it, right? You might want to send this out to another method to do the evaluation and send you back, you know, whether it was true or false, if it gets too complex of a conditional statement, right? But anyway, that's not really what we're going over here. We just need to know what we can do with conditionals before we figure out how to make them all beautiful and wonderful. So basically, right, you can chain conditions together, you can make multiple conditions, and you can have as many else ifs as you want. You can only have one if, you can only have one else, but you can have infinite else ifs, right? All right. I think that's probably enough for this episode. I hope it's been helpful. I hope it's helped you understand how conditionals work, when you would use them, why would you would use them, all that kind of stuff. And yeah, I guess I'll see you in the next episode.